Good morning, and thank you for tuning into the Andrew Tate Show, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We've got a great show for you guys today. We're going to be covering the NCAA could pay over $2.7 billion to settle the antitrust suits. We'll also be talking about the Indianapolis Star Bar's columnist Greg Doyle for covering Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. We'll also be talking about Caitlin Clark facing security scare. And since it's Friday, we'll be diving into our Florida Man Friday story of the week. And make sure that you guys stick around for the end of the show when we'll be diving into our oddities of the day. Before we start, though, I'd like to ask you guys like and follow the show. Also, we get a number of questions from viewers that come in during the show. So to ensure that your question gets read on the air, I ask that you use the tips and donation link with your question. The tips and donation link is GSMCpodcast.net. This just puts your question at the top of the list so that I can see it, and it also really helps the show. But today we're doing the show a little bit differently. We've got some guests with us here today. So we have Samantha from the Hoops and Heels podcast show, and then we also have Tommy joining us again from the GSMC College Football Show. So welcome, guys.
Wait, I don't get introduced.
And Tate, excuse me.
I'm like, wait a minute. I don't get no love over here today.
Sorry.
Man, Thomas, you come to your show, you expect to get at least a little bit of love, and it's
that's
just
what I'm saying. Like... This is a cruel world over here.
Excuse me.
Welcome you guys to the show. Excited to have you guys.
Yes,
Samantha. With Hoops and Heels. That's one of our new shows that she's just starting out with. Incredibly excited for that show. And then Thomas has been around a little while, and he has the college football show. I'm a big college football fan. If anyone's watched the show, they know that. So looking forward to chatting with Thomas about some college football as well. And Miss Faith, starting out, you said 7 point something million, and I was like, wait a minute, what story are we covering?
2.7 billion. My apologies. It's Friday. I'm ready for the weekend.
It is definitely Friday.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Alrighty. Well, if we're ready, we can go ahead and just dive into this. Alrighty.
All right.
So...
it's definitely, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
it's
going to be a little different. We've never done the show with 4 people in the show, so that is definitely different. So all right, let's dive in here and let's see what's going on.
Alrighty, yeah. So for our first segment, we're going to be covering the NCAA could pay over $2.7 billion to settle the antitrust suits. This story is coming from ESPN. So the NCAA's national office might be footing the bill for a settlement expected to be more than $2.7 billion in the landmark House versus NCAA lawsuit and other related antitrust cases in hopes of reshaping and stabilizing the college sports industry, sources told ESPN on Thursday. Sources told ESPN this week that parties have proposed the NCAA's national office, rather than its individual member schools or conferences, would pay for the settlement of past damages over a period of 10 years. The NCAA payments would be paid to former college athletes who say they were illegally prevented from making money by selling the rights to their name, image, and likeness. The settlement would come with a corresponding commitment from conferences and schools to share revenue with athletes moving forward. Sources said the settlement would establish a framework for power conferences to share revenue with their athletes in the future. Sources have told ESPN that schools are anticipating a ceiling of nearly $20 million per year for athlete revenue share moving forward. That figure is derived from a formula that is expected to be, per sources, 22% of a revenue metric that is still being discussed, which is set to based on various revenue buckets. It would be up to the schools to share that much. The dollar value and timing, sources caution, is not set and could change due to the variables involved in the case. So,
okay, all right. So I'm gonna kick things off a little bit here. This is interesting to me. This, when you look at the dollar figure, I'm still concerned about this. When they say, is it 1.7 billion? How far is that going to go back to? I mean, if you think about it,
2.7 billion.
2.7 billion. Sorry, so I'm cutting them short. You were at the beginning. You were adding a little extra on.
Yeah.
When you think about college football, for the last almost 100 years, or this past century, they've always claimed amateurism, meaning that's the reason why players did not get paid. And we're not just talking, college football is the key to this whole situation because it's the biggest revenue generating sport. But it's not just football, it's basketball, women's basketball. Sorry, I got a little bit of a frog in my throat today. Sorry, but you're going back and you're looking at all these athletes that other universities, that different universities have been able to sell uh, media rights for, jersey sales, and everything else for the past, last century. And you're talking about, okay, how far back are they going to go to give people damages? If you're only going to go back 20 years, I could see people who played 30 and 40 years saying, hey, I want to sue because they deserve money. Or even going back, these people have not been getting paid for many years. And this isn't just football. This isn't just basketball, but women's basketball as well, women's softball. This has been going on a long time. I'm gonna just quick ask Samantha a question on this one. As someone who is getting to that point where you're getting to be a college graduate in college and looking at a lawsuit like this, how do you feel about universities going back and paying athletes who didn't make money in the previous years?
I mean, I think they should. I mean, it's kind of a landmark situation in collegiate sports, and I think it'll probably change a lot of things going forward. But I mean, it's better to go back and to rather help these people rather than like try to change the future and because it's just going to start people to have conflicts and it's just not going to really solve anything since it started from so long ago. Um, but no, like I definitely see it being an issue where people just use names as like on media, but like they don't get, it's not like compensated the same way. So I definitely see it, and I think this will be landmark in collegiate sports. Um, but I think that going back would probably be more beneficial to begin with. So I do see this as a good thing.
But how far back do you go?
I
You
don't,
understand what I mean?
I
That's the
really
question.
don't know because you can't really put like a date on it, And that's like the issue. Like I genuinely don't know how far they would go back. What like
That's
would be
the
the good answer?
Yeah. Go ahead, Thomas. I was gonna let you go ahead in there.
My only real idea of when you could go back to was when all these media deals and everything started to pop up, but that's a much bigger bill than they have right now. So you really need to be careful with how far you go back because that 2.7 could turn into the 7.2 that
Yeah.
was slipped up at the beginning very, very quickly. So it's more about the NCAA. You want to get this monkey off your back, of course, but you've now set a precedent that you're willing to go back and pay all these athletes. What happens next is a huge question mark in college football and around college sports in general.
Because if they're talking about going back and going and paying damages, and you're saying, okay, we're going back to this era, to the Reggie Bush, Peyton Manning era. Then what about the guys who played back when Montana was playing and John Elway, Earl Campbell, Billy Sims, those guys? I mean, I remember, I'm a lot older than you guys. I remember playing college football games and having different players on there, and I know the players didn't get paid. I remember there was a college football game on I think it was Nintendo at the time. But these guys, they've been making college football's been making money off of players, not just in the recent time, not in this century, 2010s and 2020s, but the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so that's the thing that when I see this, I'm always curious about is where do you stop that faucet? Because I feel like this is going to be, even if they settle one lawsuit, how do they settle it for other generations? Does that make sense to you, Faith?
Yeah, it's definitely a very complicated situation, and I I can't give you a good amount of years to go back on to compensate those people, because like you said, if you go back 20 years and pay all these people who didn't make any money, then there's going to be people from 30, 40 years ago that are going to be upset about it. The way it's laid out right now, it's not, there's not a lot of information right now about it, and it just, I don't know. I mean, there's always, with stuff like this, there's always going to be people who are going to be unhappy. That's always just the case in things like this. But this is just very complicated. So I can't give you a number amount of years to go back to make everybody happy, you know?
And then there's another component to this. The main component to this is they're coming up with a program for the future. I started off with, how do you plan for the future when you still have to compensate the past?
Mhm.
But when you look at it and they're saying, a revenue model where players are going to start getting paid and setting aside $20 million per school that they can actually pay out. And did that seem low to you, Thomas? 20 million a school, especially, let's say, Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Michigan, Ohio State. That seems kind of low when you think about it. They're not putting a floor on it. Schools can decide on how much they want to spend up to 20 million. But two questions I'm gonna hit with Thomas. One, did that seem kind of low? And give me your overall thought on that one. And then with Samantha being the Hoops and Heels show, which is an all-encompassing women's sports show, one of the big fears about a settlement like this is that it could destroy Title IX and a lot of sports that are protected by Title IX, that for women, a lot of those sports could go away. And that's a dangerous thing about this, about either way on this lawsuit, how it affects everyone. So that's a concern. So Thomas, give me your thoughts first, and then I'm gonna roll to Samantha about concerns about how this could affect women's sports.
Yeah, so talking about the settlements, it's something that I've brought up a lot on my show where not every athletic department is built the same, not by a long shot. So there's a lot that make, $40 million dollars a year in revenue. There's Ohio State who makes 258 million. So there's this huge gap, and I think using a moniker of $20 million dollars is probably not the way you want to go about this. I think you have to have some type of way to make sure it is equitable all the way down the line, and everyone has kind of the same allocation of whatever resources they do have. So say it's 5% of your annual revenue goes toward this type of thing. I think that's a viable way to go about it. But also, when you're a smaller team and you see the $20 million figure, you say, okay, at least the gap between us and, UGA and Texas and all the teams you were talking about isn't necessarily that large in this part of the arena. So it could be kind of a, keeping the young guy or the small guys a little bit happier type of thing. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's something that I'm sure other schools, including Ohio State, Texas, and all those schools, will take advantage of in the future. If there is a little bit of leeway above 20 million, I think they'll definitely take it.
You know, I 20 million doesn't sound like a lot of money when you're thinking about college football. Just college football. They're talking about, wasn't that like for all sports, 20
Mhm.
million per year for all sports?
And then how you split that between the sports gets a little sketchy.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's what I mean about 20 million. What is that? 19.8 to college football and point 0.2 to everything else.
Yeah.
That's a dangerous situation there
If they're
because of women's sports and Olympic sports. And that's why I
yeah.
was with Samantha, I was saying I was concerned about some of the other women's sports. Go ahead. Well, you let you finish with your statement, Thomas,
I was just
and
gonna
then go to
say
Samantha.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah, I mean, if they're going based off who makes the revenue, football's making about 19.9 of that, baseball's making zero point 0.1, and then the other sports are gonna have to pay the school because they end up losing money. So it's gonna be somewhat of a battle, not only around every college, but within those athletic departments. How you allocate that money is gonna be a nightmare that I'm glad I don't have to deal with.
That's going to be hard. Go ahead, Samantha. Give us your thoughts.
I mean, I feel like this is a fair comment to make. And just based on like history, I don't think women's sports are going to be taking half of that money. I think they'll probably be taking less of it. Um, I don't know. I just feel like they might, but just based on history, but also just like I'm a bit confused on how they're supposed to split that up. Like, are they going to split up based on like who's getting the most media attention? Like,
Well, here's the thing that hasn't been stated. That's why this conversation is. One, I in the chat. I sent you guys kind of a breakdown of how much per NCAA, how much each department, each sports program makes, like football, basketball. But when you look at it, majority, I mean, make sure you understand, majority of college sports athletic departments lose massive amounts of money. Now you're going to have to add an extra $20 million a year to a program that's already losing money. And the fear, I mean, like, I'm very protective of women's sports in general. I think they don't get enough recognition and they're very valuable. There are a lot of, speculation that there's going to be universities that are taking some of the lesser, more popular sports and just putting them on the cutting room floor. I don't know if did anyone see what I put in the chat there? Yeah, so you can kind of have a good understanding of that. So go ahead, Samantha.
I was just gonna say 31 million is crazy for football. That is so funny. Like I knew it was a big difference, but I was like, that's a huge difference. Like, oh my goodness. So yeah, I mean, women's basketball, yeah, they're up there, but the other sports, they're not making as much profit, unfortunately. I think that's due to a lot of media attention, and I think that that probably will come into effect with splitting up 20 million.
And that's on average across the board, all schools.
Hmm.
Probably, I don't have the greatest percentage of that, but I would probably say 80% of that belongs to the top 10% of the schools, and the
Hmm.
rest of those schools are all losing money. All their programs lose money, including football. If you're not in a power conference. Go ahead, TJ.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean Tommy, but yeah.
Oh, I can't believe I just called you
That's so
TJ.
funny. I'll take the compliment. He's a good guy. Um,
Wow,
but
Wow.
I
yeah,
totally did that.
yeah, I mean, you talk about college athletics today, and it's football and everyone else, and that's just kind of the way it's been for the past little bit. But that gap is only really growing as of right now. So there's going to be difficult decisions that have to be made, and it's very, very likely that Title IX kind of goes out the window in all of this because a lot of the non-revenue making sports, because of the not getting enough media attention and things of that nature, are women's sports. So it's going to get a little sketchy and a little cutthroat within these athletic departments, and some decisions are going to have to be made that are going to really upset some people. And I think it all goes back to kind of the NCAA and all of these college sports in general just not having enough foresight with all of these situations that were coming down the road, and it's all caught up to them fairly quickly. So some tough things are going to have to happen that probably didn't have to happen in the grand scheme of things, but when you're a decade late on paying athletes and doing NIL and things of that nature, this stuff happens pretty quickly.
I will tell you right now, if they don't figure out the layout with that 20 million, there are going to be so many Title IX lawsuits coming out. So many.
Oh,
You have no
a
idea.
ton of them.
Yeah.
A
So,
ton of them are going to come out. And
yeah.
then I said, Samantha, you were talking about you were surprised at how much uh, the schools make, and I put in another graphic. I just pulled up the last second to show you kind of most schools lose money, but that top group of schools, man, they make a ton. This is the last thing we're gonna talk about. Then we're gonna go on break here. This is just kind of showing Samantha how much these schools pull in. So, all right.
All right, guys. Well, with that, we are going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to be covering Indianapolis Star Bar's columnist Greg Doyle from covering Caitlin Clark in the Fever after inappropriate exchange, and then we'll also be discussing Caitlin Clark's security scare prompts major WNBA changes. So make sure you guys stick around, and we will be back in a minute.